Migrating to Australia, the podcast about people who come to Australia, funnily enough.
Good place to come to, Grant. Very good place to come.
Dave, I've been worn. I'm completely worn down by the whole COVID thing, so I don't have time to think of a very amazing introduction. Yeah, so for those of you around the world who are experiencing the COVID issues, we're right there with you. We thought we'd got off lightly, but no, this thing just crawls out from anywhere. And of course, we're known as the lucky country. I would also say that we're often the lazy country and increasingly the stupid country, because 1/4 of the people who have had COVID and have been told to stay at home, these are people who don't think they have COVID. These are people who have been tested and know they've got COVID. They're out going to work and walking around and just hanging out. So
very disappointing, Grant, very disappointing. Let's talk about some good things today. We've got a great guest on the podcast, Mr. Triet Nguyen, approaching 30. He's been in Australia for a long time and is a senior analyst, private advisory, Deloitte Australia. We wanted to talk to you, Triet, about your journey. How long have you been in Australia for now?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Grant and David. Obviously, I've known you for 8 years now.
That's a long time. That's a long time.
It's a long time. Well, it's definitely gone by quickly. Like, I just never realized it's been that long.
As long as you've been having fun, Triet. You've been having fun.
I absolutely have been having fun.
Now, David, Triet, here's the place where I have to butt in and say, listeners to this podcast should take the information contained within as general advice and not specific legal advice. If you want specific legal advice, do what Triet did and get hold of someone like David, preferably David, and you, yes, and you could be him.
Grant, the reason I wanted to talk to Triet and introduce him to listeners is because he's lived the dream and he's living the dream. He came as a secondary school student, worked his way through university with staggeringly good grades that he'll downplay because he's a man of incredible modesty, and he's working for one of the top 4 as a senior analyst at 28. So when did the Australian dream begin to take place? When did you first think, I want to migrate to Australia?
Well, yeah, completely upfront with you. I think Australia, for me, when I was a kid, it was one of my choices. Like, I've always wanted to go overseas and pursue my study, definitely my undergraduate overseas. But then I think it's an opportunity just came by when the international director at my high school in Peninsula Grammar, at that time they were looking to expand into the international, student market and experience. So he came to Vietnam, and we had an opportunity to have an interview, a discussion via IDP. And unfortunately, at the end of that interview and further subsequent discussions, I was very fortunate to have a full tuition scholarship at Peninsula Grammar. And that's how I came to Australia a bit earlier than I expected, because I was kind of thinking I would go overseas when I finished high school in Vietnam, but I think that was too good an opportunity to be passed on.
Has Peninsula Grammar got something of a footprint in Vietnam, has it?
Yeah, so because I remember from my year, it was the second year that Vietnamese students received scholarship from Peninsula Grammar, and there were only 2 of us in that year, but since then it's in the 10th, 11th year now. So I think every year now the school has been receiving about 5 to 6 students. So that's definitely growing in terms of its presence in Vietnam. It hasn't got like a campus, but a lot of Vietnamese students have come to know the school because of its quality and because of international education focus.
Grant's down from that way, or lived down that way, and so he and I both know Peninsula Grammar well. Can you tell listeners about Peninsula Grammar?
So Peninsula Grammar is a private high school. It's got students from all the way from elementary to year 12. To me, obviously, I really enjoy my time at the school. It's one of the top schools in Victoria, and I would say across Australia as well. What I enjoyed is, firstly, the teachers are excellent. They're really supportive of students and their career and their education experience. I think secondly, it's got a really strong international student community, which is growing year by year. And I think that is important because for me, my experience when I came to Australia when I was 16 years old, the sense of community and belonging was really important. And for me to have 50 other boys surrounded with me in the boarding house, in addition to my Australian friends at school, I think that's really important. And that really helped me. I never felt the sense of, I guess, homesick or loneliness because I think of that strong community. So I think that's a really strong point if someone wants to come to Australia and have a similar experience.
16 is incredibly young. Grant, could you migrate to another country at 16? I couldn't.
I probably wouldn't have even thought about it.
I was too immature at 16, Triet.
Well, I mean, I was immature back then. But I think, I just want to draw back to that point, really, because you've got other like-minded students and boys and girls around you at that time. And that really, everyone was trying to achieve their successes in their, not just academic, but their future in Australia. So I think that together we've been together as a community, and everyone seems to have been doing well, whether they're in Australia at the moment or whether they've come back home. So I think that's really is a testament to the quality of not just Australian education, but also the lifestyle that the country has here.
David, can you name a couple of famous Peninsula alumni?
Triet Nguyen, then the minister for a certain state minister with a family name that begins with T. Mr. Tien went to. Did Mr. Tien go to Peninsula Grammar?
I don't know. I would have thought he was a Melbourne Grammar boy myself. I would have thought Geelong College or Grammar he would have gone to, being a Western Districts boy.
I don't know. I thought
he's one of the squatocracy, mate.
Well, you definitely know Grant.
Right.
One person. Peter Mitchell.
That's right. Yeah, Peter Mitchell. Yeah. That's right. Because he always goes on about he's from Frankston, but he neglects to say that he went to Peninsula. But, David, the household name who went to Peninsula is James Rain. Australia Crawl was a Peninsula band, yeah. So,
and are we talking Peter Mitchell, the newsreader, or is this a different Peter? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Peter Mitchell, who always says he's from Frankston and barracks for Collingwood, but he's one of the rah boys.
So not a man of the people after all. Triet, tell me something. You came from a gifted high school in Vietnam, yes?
Yeah.
And what, scholastically, how did you find the transition studying gifted high school in Vietnam to Peninsula Grammar? Was it a jump at all, or was it easy, or how did you find it?
I think it gave me a lot of advantages and a lot of preparation for my transition in Australia. But at the same time, it was quite different because back in Vietnam, students, even at my school, tend to study across a number of subjects. And at that point in time, I felt like we didn't receive a lot of, career advice or direction as to what you want to do in when you go to uni, or if you don't go to uni, what you want to do with your future career. That's something it's actually quite distinctly different, and I felt that way when I went to Peninsula, because in addition to I was able to tell my subjects with what I wanted to study at university, and also there was a team of counselors who were particularly dedicated to helping students with finding their passions and how to help the students get to where they wanted to be. So I think that's one of the more important differences. But I think the academic rigor that I experienced when I was back in Vietnam also helped me with transitioning into the Australian curriculum, because some of the subjects, like for example, math was at a higher level. But then it was from a different angle when I studied math in Australia. Even though, say, the technical level of difficulty might not be as high as in Vietnam or pretty much in any Asian countries, as everyone would know. But I think the Australian mathematics curriculum has quite a practical perspective, which I really enjoyed. And obviously, the third point is the English language. So I was fortunate to have quite a fair bit of English exposure since I was in grade 1 in Vietnam. So that's before I came to Australia. Was that gave me more than 10 years of having experience with the language. So I felt quite lucky when I went to Australia. I didn't really have much of the language barrier that I was able to converse and to apply it in my study experience.
Triet in Peninsula, it's quite a heavy focus on sport. Did you feel any pressure when you arrived at Peninsula to take up football or swimming and athletics was something that they were quite strong in?
Well, I completely agree with you, Brian. And to be honest, back then I wasn't I was definitely not an athlete person. But again, that's a good thing. When I went to Peninsula, there were a lot of sports choice at the school. I was in the table tennis team. I was in the cross country competition between all the houses at the school. So I think that's my participation, my involvement, and I could see and badminton. So I think there were a lot of choices for students. For me, I think it was great. It was integrated into part of the curriculum and the way of life to after keep everyone fit and healthy, not just studying and doing their things.
And that's good to see.
But I think you definitely, I guess, no one pressure. Do you want to play footy? But I think to be honest, year 11, just coming to Australia, maybe a bit late to the footy game. But I think it's definitely a good, I guess, a conversation thing to know about. And even nowadays, I still, I don't follow any particular footy player or footy team, but I try to keep up the key developments every year, just so that if anyone talks about footy, then we kind of have something to talk about. But other than that, I don't force myself to actually watch every single footy game. But I think I appreciate that that's an important part of the Australian culture. And yeah,
David, what's the latest in the badminton world?
That's a great question. Do you know what? We would play badminton on the beach in summer or in the back garden at home. We don't play it with the ferocity that I've seen people play it with. It's actually a very vigorous game, isn't it, when it's played properly?
It is very competitive. And I think this really reminds me of my roommate back in Peninsula. His name is Jensen, and personally, I think he's an excellent badminton player. His skills were just exemplary. Yeah, and I still remember supporting his games, and it was an amazing experience.
Triet, sorry, David, I just want to chase down the badminton burrow for just a minute. Triet, which country is the arch rival of Vietnam in badminton? Is it Thailand? Is it Taiwan? Is it China?
I think all of the countries that you mentioned have all very good players. I can't think of one specific, but I know, for example, for soccer or football, Thailand and Vietnam are quite rivalries between each other, and that's obviously in soccer, it's not as popular as football in Australia, but I think back in Asia, it's quite a strong cultural thing, just like how you guys have the AFL here.
Yeah. A lot of students come to Australia and they think Melbourne, Sydney, Melbourne, Sydney, Melbourne, Sydney. As you were picked up at the airport by the people from Peninsula Grammar and you drove through Melbourne and you kept driving down the Nepean Highway further and further, and what were your thoughts? You thought, oh my gosh, were you excited to be going to a regional school? Were you excited, or were you sort of a little apprehensive because you're away from the big smoke?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the big smoke, because when the year that I came was around the time that the Black Friday took place. I think it was a week or two after I arrived in Australia. So when I arrived, I still remember to this day that it was a really hot day. It's just definitely way hotter compared to Vietnam and way drier. So, but I think with your question about the regional area that I was going to, where the school was situated, I think it might be something that I expected from coming from overseas. Most students would expect study around the Melbourne CBD or not too far, but obviously Peninsula it's quite an exception in that regard. But I think that didn't really last long, because I felt like the school was just in such a nice area, and it's got all the beautiful scenery around the school, and now after 10 years being in Australia, I would prefer living in such areas, like regional, beautiful country scenery, and Masala is quite a wealthy suburb as well. So I think that those are the really nice areas to look into. And I've got a few international students who have stayed in Australia, who have come home, and who have decided to pursue a career here as well. I think they also have similar experience. Some still prefer that city busy life, but whereas others they've realized the lifestyle that they might experience at regional Australia or a bit further, and I actually prefer that lifestyle because I think all of us are leading really busy lives, and being able to go back home in a very relaxing, beautiful atmosphere and scenery, I think it's something really it just allows you to keep your mind refreshed and shut after such a long day. I think you definitely...
Is that why you chose to study at La Trobe University, for the same reason?
Well, yeah, part of the reason, and also the other major factor is, as you would know, is La Trobe did also give me a scholarship for my double degree throughout the course. So I think that was really my main motivator of studying at La Trobe as well.
Grant, when I helped Triet with his migration, I looked at his transcript and I nearly passed out. Now, I don't know how you were as a student. I wasn't very flash. I was a late bloomer.
I want to know whether Triet was living in, what's the college closest to the Union? Was that, I was Chisholm. So were you in Chisholm and I was down in Menzies?
No, actually, because in high school, as you know, David, I was living in the boarding house, but when I went to uni, I chose to kind of live in a different bar. I actually live in share accommodation outside university.
Not in the flats either. You weren't out in the flats either.
There's I guess there's Union Bar near Chisholm College. Which sometimes I went to. Hopefully not too often, but that's the place too.
That was the best thing about Chisholm. It was about 100 steps.
Of course, Triet, I bombed out of La Trobe twice. I was very immature at 18 and 19. Grant, did you finish at La Trobe or did you transfer?
No, I pulled the pin on uni until I went back years later to do horticulture. I didn't want to do anything that I was studying, so I thought, well, I may as well go and do some things that I like to do rather than stay here and rack up my HECS debt.
Well, I tell you what, when I looked at Triet's transcript, do you know how many 100s he had on his commerce degree, his degree?
I have no idea.
Nine 100s. Now, how does anybody get 100 to begin with? 9 100s. What, obviously a man of prodigious intelligence, but how hard did you work this whole period? I mean, you must have been flat to the books non-stop the whole period, or did you have some balance?
No, well, I think completely honest. When I was at uni, I think my time between studying and other extracurricular activities would be, I would say, 50-50, because I study hard for my subjects, and I guess the reason that really contributed to, I guess, a good performance in academic for me was I really enjoy what I studied. So to me, it wasn't really like putting days and hours into studying. You definitely still spend good hours to achieve what I wanted to, but it wasn't like I didn't stay up any night to study. I think the latest, say, for example, during exam period, we say 11 o'clock at night. I didn't really rely on coffee or anything or stayed all night at the library, all of that. And I guess the other 50% of my time at uni, which was also quite lucky because a lot of the activities that I partook in, David, was also at uni. So I was quite involved with the La Trobe University Student Association, and also my part-time jobs and my other voluntary positions were also with the uni. So really for me that I didn't really have to travel far to do a lot of things that I enjoyed at uni.
Triet, sorry, David, you did a double degree. So you mentioned you were doing economics, so you did economics and accounting. What was the double degree?
Mine was in
accounting and finance, because I think with economics, you mentioned that you didn't really struggle with it. A lot of people struggle with having to put reality aside when they're analysing economics. And I remember I used to have this conversation with economics lecturers all the time and going, but it's demonstrably not true. That's not what the...
I think economics is quite an interesting field, and it requires a lot of analytical and most of the time also debating around the topics as well. Majors were not in economics, but actually I was very interested in economics. That I remember that I took 2 third-year economics subjects that usually only economics students would have taken. So I remember those were the third-year advanced macroeconomics, government fellow in policy, which is interesting now, and the other was central banks policy. And those subjects were obviously not core subjects for my degree, but I only took them purely because of my interest in economics.
How long ago did you finish at La Trobe?
I graduated end of 2014, so it's 5 years now.
Okay, so at that time was modern monetary theory becoming part of the curriculum, or is that still being ignored by universities?
It was definitely part of the curriculum, but in terms of the prominence in the curriculum, and obviously I was after I finished, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to get involved more with economics, but I know that it was part of the curriculum and what I was taught about it. But after that, obviously, a lot of things has happening with the economies since 2014 when I graduated, and definitely in recent months. So it's very interesting developments to watch.
A lot of young people who are listening who might want to do secondary and then tertiary study in this country, what are the messages? What do you want to tell them so that they don't fall into any of the traps you may have fallen into?
So I think for students who went from secondary to tertiary, do you want to talk about students who did secondary student in Australia?
There'll be a lot of kids come, such as yourself when you're about 16. If they're listening, or mum and dad are listening, and they think, I want to send my boy or my daughter to school in Australia secondary, what have they got to be aware of? Because 16 is such a young age.
I think 16 is a young age, but for those students who have the opportunity to pursuing a secondary education in Australia, my first advice is to take full advantage of it. And it's just not the education and the certificate that you get at the end of your study, but also any opportunities and networks that you can create out of your years at secondary school in Australia. Practically, as I mentioned before, the career advice and guidance given by teachers and staff at high school or secondary schools are really critical. So I think that's something that they can definitely take advantage of. If they didn't have a lot of guidance or clarity around what they want to do at their home country, then coming to Australia, I think it's something that you can definitely rely on and you use it to the best advantage. So say, for example, if you're not sure whether you want to do a course in, for example, aerospace, for example. So that's definitely something, because there'll be teachers and staff and previous students at your school who would have gone through the same process. So they will be able to guide you through what you could do to get to where you want, and whether your strengths and your weaknesses, whether it's actually aligned with what you want to do at university. And it could be the right choice or it could be the wrong choice, but it's purely because you didn't have a lot of clarity before. And the second point, which is, I guess, related to the first point as well, is when picking a major to study at university, you definitely should pursue it according to your passion and what you want to do in your career. Now, it's a fair point saying that when I was 18 years old, I didn't know what to do, and potentially your first choice of what you want to study at uni might not be what you think, might not be what you enjoy later on. But I think it gives you a good beginning. So definitely go to study something that you think you will enjoy, because I guess the purpose of education is to give you the right skill set and knowledge to pursue your interest and career later in life, not for, it shouldn't be used for any other purposes. If you think, David, I think you've made this point a few times on different social platforms, is do you want to study for accounting because you want to stay in Australia permanently after? And my point is, if you don't like accounting, don't do it, because
absolutely.
Imagine myself, if I didn't enjoy accounting, I would not want to go near an accounting lecture, because I think I would just be bored to death. Obviously, it wasn't the case for me, because it is really something that I generally enjoy. But I'm just think from a perspective of someone who might not make the best decision because they allows their education decision to be interfered by other legitimate factors, but shouldn't play a role in, or a significant role in, choosing what to study.
Has your network from secondary school been a stronger and more beneficial network than your university network, or are they been pretty much similar?
I will say, from my personal experience, it will be it's actually quite similar.
And what of your colleagues? Did you come to Peninsula Grammar with any other students from Vietnam? Just, you said two. There were two of you.
Yeah. So
are you still?
We're still friends. So I just texted her not long ago. Obviously, she has, her name is Mai, and she's a really good friend of mine, and she has taken a different path. She didn't become an accountant like me, but obviously her journey is also very fascinating. She's traveled the world, studying, working in the UK, in the US, in Australia. So I think all of us, having gone to Australia, have been able to define our own successes and then, I guess, form our own journeys. But I think at the end of the day, when we look back at our experience back in secondary school, back in university, I think it's definitely something that we always appreciate, because it's giving us a lot of opportunities that we could never imagine, say 10, 15 years ago, when we were still kids and students.
Is Vietnamese still keen to do tertiary study? I mean, they'll always come, and they do come, but is Australia still an important destination, or is the US or Canada, anything overtaken Australia as a student destination of choice at tertiary level?
I think Australia is definitely still an important, has an important position on, say, the ranking list. But obviously, as you mentioned, David, there are also other choices: the US, Canada, the UK, or even choices that might be a bit closer to home that I've noticed in recent years. So Singapore and Thailand and Taiwan, they all have very prestigious academic institutions. So I see for a lot of Vietnamese students, they don't have to travel far and wide. And even in Vietnam per se, the education landscape has changed quite a lot over the last 10 years as well. Because from my personal experience as well, I know that my high school that I came from in Vietnam, over the last 10 years, they've done some amazing work in terms of bringing the education experience for the students closer to what an international experience would typically reflect and provide students. So I think it's definitely education as a whole, overseas education as a whole, has become more competitive, and Australia, if wanting to be competitive in that landscape, I think it has a lot of advantages, but I think it's definitely something that should always continuously improve if it wants to remain attractive to international students, just not just those from Vietnam, but from any country in the world.
Triet, you've got to the quite dizzying heights in the profession. You're occupying a position that a lot of people graduating accountant would aspire to. How are you a bridge between Vietnam and the sort of investment and big business in Australia?
I think that's definitely where I would like, because currently in my role, I work predominantly with clients in the private market, which obviously is an important, pretty much the driving engine of the Australian economy. But there, from Vietnam perspective, it is also growing very fast every year annually in Vietnam. So definitely there are a lot of opportunities that could present or that could arise from that space. And I would really like to take advantage of my cultural, my educational, and my professional experience to be that bridge. So I think, Grant, you made a really solid point on that.
Triet, every accounting graduate dreams of the top four, as Grant was saying. It's the holy grail. You had medium firm at a very excellent medium firm experience before you moved to the top four. Would you recommend that as a pathway to the Big Four? Because there's a lot of romance around the Big Four when it's hard grind.
Well, I think the obviously working for Big Four is definitely dream of many accountants, and I guess in this area I would say consultants, because they just don't do accounting, but they also do other consulting work. But I think it's definitely a path if someone getting out of university cannot go into Big Four, but that's still what they want to do later in life. So I think there are always different pathways to get to that stage. I guess same with new education. If you want to study for something, when you can't get into that field straight away, you can do different pathways, and in the end, you can still get into what you want. But I think the Big Four firms, they are they're reputational, and they are the dreams of many, especially nearly graduates, because not just because of the name, but from my experience, Deloitte, for example, does invest a lot in its professionals. So I think the amount of training, not just technical training, but also interpersonal training, opportunities to work on different, very exciting engagements and working with people across the firm is definitely something that some of the smaller firms will not have because by nature, the smaller firms, they just don't have that capacity or the right capability to provide their employees with those opportunities. But at the same time, as you know, I worked in my previous firm, which was also a very premium boutique firm in Victoria. And
absolutely,
it was a really positive experience for me, and I learned a lot out of it, because I think boutique firms, smaller firms also have their own advantage. That is, you are able to work really closely with the partners, with the managers, and you are basically thrown into the work on your first day, getting exposure to everything from scratch to where you want to be. So I think that's also the other benefit of working in smaller firms. But I guess in summary, what I want to say is whatever your pathway is, I guess don't limit your opportunities and don't limit your view or your judgment as to where you want to be, because I think if you pick a good organization, regardless of what their size is, they will be able to provide you with the right opportunities for your career development as long as you put in the efforts.
Would you do it all again if you were 16 with what you know?
I think, actually, looking back again, definitely are things that I would have done, not differently, but maybe spend more efforts in. For example, I would love to network more and more at uni and at secondary school, because I realized really the importance of networking and maintaining genuine relationships with people, because that helped me not just professionally, but I think importantly help me with my life personally as well, because I think I'll use our relationship as an example. We start off, I guess, in a more professional capacity, because you were a generous sponsor of my student association back then. But I think beyond that year those years that we worked together, we've since become friends, and you will also help me. You also helped me with my migration journey. So I think there's a lot that you can learn from your networks, and I think the key there is also having that genuine relationship, not just network for the sake of networking, because I think that's not how it's supposed to be. So that's definitely one thing that I would have done differently, not differently, but spend more efforts on. But I think looking back, whether I would do something differently, I can say that I have no regrets as to what I've been through.
What are the 3 top things anybody listening needs to remember? The 3 top things to consider if they want to come to Australia?
So I think one thing is to be courageous and be yourself. So when you come to Australia, regardless of which stage, whether it's as a secondary student or as a tertiary student or seasoned professional, I think it's important to be courageous, so that it will allow you to overcome all of the ordinary challenges that someone coming from overseas to a foreign country will likely face. It could be a language barrier, could be differences in lifestyle. So, and then be yourself is when you come to a country like Australia, which is really multicultural. I think it's your identity, who you are, that will make a positive contribution to the diversity of the place that you belong to. So whether it's a work organization or whether it's a country as a whole, because I think Australia does appreciate that. I guess don't come to Australia and act differently of who you not are. I mean, if there are positive things that you learn and pick up along the way in Australia, that will eventually form who you are. Personally, I've learned and I've changed my lifestyle so that in a more Australian or multicultural way. But I think that's nature. That doesn't necessarily change who you are. But I think that's just all the essential parts of trying to form an identity, but you don't lose your original identity. I think secondly is also to be resilient and be determined to follow your passion. So again, coming to a different country, you have a lot of things to worry about. How to support yourself, what opportunities to take advantage of, how do I get there, and all of that. So I think at the end of the day, remember why you came to Australia and why you're here for and what you're trying to achieve, and stick to those. So it might not be a long straight road. It could be winding. There could be obstacles along the way. Actually, there will likely be obstacles along the way. But I think don't be let down by those obstacles, and just stick to your plan, stick to your original objective. And I think eventually, by being resilient, you get through those obstacles. And I think thirdly, networking. I think it's a point that I can't really stress more on, because especially coming to a foreign country without knowing a lot of people here, it's important to build your own connection, build your own network, people who you want to be surrounded with, and people who you think you can have a positive influence on and get a positive influence from. I think that's a key importance, because as I said before, they will I think networking, later on, you just never know what you can help them with, and vice versa, what they can help you with. So I think being surrounded with like-minded people, with people who you like to be associated with, will actually, from a social perspective, will help you overcome all of the loneliness and the homesick and all of the, the feeling foreign in a different country, but also professionally and professionally, they will just be really valuable in your future career or future studies, whatever you may choose to undertake.
My last question, and when I utter the words "my last question," Grant always has at least one or two after. My last question: you've been a temporary resident of this country, a permanent resident of this country, and now you're a citizen. What's the best thing about being Australian?
Well, I think, as you know, David, I'm an avid traveller. So I think you practically having the Australian passport for me is just an amazing experience. Last year I traveled to Europe across 7 different countries. I didn't have to apply for a visa, and that was just such a huge relief. And obviously, as I was looking to utilize my passport again, usually I make my plan for my next trip straight after I come back from one is just plan my next trip. But obviously, I think the passport needs to be put back in the shelf this year, and I can't wait to take it out again when things become better. But I think that's a practical consideration. But I think from an overall experience, is definitely being an Australian citizen is an important. I think it would probably be my most important achievement so far, because basically what it has done is it allows me to formally establish a link to a country that I have chosen to be my second home. I've lived in Australia for 11 years now, which is nearly half of my life, or half of my age. And at one point in time, my time in Australia will be the majority, or Australia will be the country where I spend the majority of my life in. So I think that's a really positive experience that I was able to get from becoming an Australian citizen.
I'm always interested in what people like and don't like now that they're firmly planted here. What's your favourite thing about Australia?
Favorite thing, I would say, we've talked about a fair bit about Korea, so I think that's definitely my important part of my life in Australia and why I decided to stay in Australia. But I think my other favorite thing is the people in Australia that range from my colleagues at work to my friends in Australia who I have had a chance to know over the years. And the other favorite thing that I would say is the food. Melbourne, especially Melbourne, is like, I think the food culture, as everyone would appreciate, I think it's exemplary. And I compare that with when I went to Europe and a few of the countries. The food is great in terms of they have their own traditional dishes, but when you're trying to find a place that has good food from different cuisines around the world, I think Melbourne is the one that is hard to beat.
But what's Australian food?
I think I like pies.
Pies are English.
Yeah, I think Australian. When you ask about what is Australian food, obviously we know all of the traditional food like the pies, Australian steaks and all of that. I think that those are all great, but Australia itself is a multicultural country, and I think the fact that I just mentioned, it's hard to find a place that has so many good food and so many different cultural aspects assimilated into the single Australian life like we experience in Melbourne and in Australia. It is quite a testament to the multiculturalism that we have here. And I think when you ask what is Australian food, I would say all of the above. Yeah, it's hard to find a place that I could think other example like New York and London, for example, would be the other places that kind of can showcase that multiculturalism. But definitely Melbourne is the place to be.
Sounds like we've still got to get more emu and kangaroo and possum out there, Dave.
Senior Analyst, Deloitte Australia, Triet. Nguyen, you've been a delight to have on. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Nguyen. I will speak to you next time.
Great to speak to you, Triet. David, what would someone do if they needed to get your advice to become the next Triet?
Well, to become the next Triet you'd be blessed to become the next Triet. Migrating to Australia podcast to listen, to get my contact details off the web, or Twitter. David Bongiorno, my Twitter handle, the fastest, easiest way to get in touch. Twitter is my passion, my love, my favourite platform, and I am DAVIDBONGIORNO. That's my Twitter handle.
So everybody, wherever you are, wash your hands, then wash your hands again, and just stay away from everybody.
And wear a mask. Wear a mask.
So thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll be back in your ear hole again shortly.
Ciao, guys. Have a good day.
See you, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye.